Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I thought it would be fun to take these gorgeous neon gel pastes and take them to the next level. I've already done a video with them and they are doing these cards here, and they're just a great medium to add to your cards, to add not only the vibrant neon color, but also a little bit of dimension when you use them through a stencil. So first thing I'm going to do to take it to a next level is I'm going to mix in some microfine glitter. So gel paste is a little bit transparent. Even though these have color to them, there's some transparency to them. So by mixing the glitter in with the paste, you're going to be able to see the sparkle in that neon color. So I'm going to use the Leafy Flourish stencil and embossing folder set. Now, when I started doing this video, I had only planned to make one card. I had this idea. I thought this would be fun to use this Leafy Flourish stencil set with that neon gel paste as well as some matte blending inks to create some vibrant, unique, funky leaves. Now, first thing I'm going to do is use some matte blending inks to stencil the first several layers. The first stencil I'm going to do last because I'm going to use the neon paste for them. So I just went through the stencils, figured out exactly which one I wanted to use, which layer I wanted to use for those neon pastes. Typically, I'll only use one layer for neon paste simply because it adds some dimension. And if you do more than one stencil layer with neon paste, not only do you have to wait for it to dry between the different layers, but sometimes having that little bit of dimension in that one area can affect the stencil for the next layer. So I'm only going to use one of the layers of stencils with that neon gel paste. So for this particular layer here, I'm kind of blending these inks in a rainbow. I wanted green blues to be at the base of my leaves, and then I went throughout the different colors to go and have pink and purple at the tips. So the first color I used there was Surf's Up. Then I used Margarita, that's that vibrant green. I had some ink on my brush from a previous project, so it didn't really show up as vibrant as it actually is, but that's totally okay. It looks totally fine for the finished project. Pina Colada is the yellow, Sugar Candy was the pink, and Spice Plum was the purple. And for my next layer, I'm doing the same rainbow order. I'm kind of paying attention to where the different colors are on the layer below and kind of putting them in the same-ish areas. It doesn't matter if it's exactly the same area, but I do want to make sure that the leaves kind of coordinate with each other. For the next layer, we have some stem detail, so I'm going to use some anthracite with that. Now, anthracite, when you look at the top of the pad, it looks like it's black, but it's got some bluey, greeny, teal properties in it. So it coordinates really beautifully with the rest of the inks. It enhances all of that stem and leaf detail. Now, the one thing to know is these matte blending inks are water reactive. So when I go and put my gel paste over top of them, the areas that gel paste is over this anthracite, it is going to blend or bleed a little bit into that neon gel paste. I knew it was going to happen. If you don't want that to happen, I would substitute this anthracite for a permanent ink, like StazOn ink will not do that. If you want to make sure that it doesn't move anywhere, that would be what you would need to do. It does make it a little bit more difficult to get it off your stencil because you need to use some StazOn ink remover, but I knew what was going to happen when I used the anthracite, and I was totally fine with it, and I like the look of it. For the layer with my neon paste, I'm going to mix them with glitter first. So I have a palette knife for each one of the different colors. I'm putting a little bit on my glass surface, putting a little scoop of glitter on top of there, and then I'm using that palette knife to blend in that glitter. I want to make sure it's blended in throughout that gel paste to make sure that it's completely combined before I start putting it on my stencil layer. Another option here would be to put the gel paste on the stencil, then sprinkle on that glitter, but the glitter is only going to be on the surface then. I wanted to make sure that it was blended right into that gel paste so you could see the sparkliness throughout, not necessarily just on the surface, but you could absolutely just put it on the surface if you want. It's going to change the finish of the gel paste, but even mixing it into the gel paste changes up that finish. By having a stencil knife per color, I'm making sure that I don't have to clean off my palette knives sorry, I said stencil knife, but I meant palette knife. I'm making sure that I don't have to clean them off between colors. It just makes it a little bit easy. Some of these are not my favorite palette knives to use for stenciling, but again, I just wanted to make sure that each one had their own color to it, making it a little bit easier when I go to put it on that stencil, because I can make sure that I'm not going to create mud and mix a couple colors together that I don't necessarily want mixed together. Once I have these all mixed together, I'm ready to put them on my stencil. So the first layer here, I'm not being particularly careful with putting it through the stencil, but I am making sure to have it in the different areas. I'm not necessarily smoothing it out yet. I'm going to take my large paste tool and I will smooth it out all at once. Now, when I picked out or took an amount of paste from my little container, I tried to guesstimate how much I was going to use. I wanted to make sure I didn't run short, but I also didn't want to have a whole excess of paste. Now, even though I do have some extra paste left, it's not going to go to waste. I'm going to take some cardstock and I'm just going to smear those pastes onto that cardstock and use them for the different projects. And this is where it led me into making a few different cards rather than just making the one card, because I like some of the backgrounds so much and also wanted to die cut some of them. So my stenciled image there was just on hammer mill cardstock. These pieces here are just on hammer mill cardstock. So it doesn't need to be any special cardstock that you're using. This particular background here ends up being my absolutely favorite one. I love when you do this with backgrounds, you never know what you're going to get. You're going to get the coolest looks, and they're ones that you can't necessarily repeat. So I am smearing it onto that cardstock as thin as possible. It's going to reduce the drying time. It's also going to make that neon paste look a little bit more almost like pastel neons. But because I'm smearing it in a really thin layer on that cardstock, it also shows up the glitter a little bit more. The glitter shows a little bit better on these backgrounds than it actually did on the stenciled leaf part with that dimension. You still see the glitter on the stenciled leaf part, but because the paste on those backgrounds is really, really thin, it just sparkles just a little bit more. The camera doesn't show it very well, but in real life, it's got some really beautiful sparkle to it. And this is the one that ended up being my favorite just for a background. I think it just has a really cool and unique look to it. So I'm not necessarily going to use all of these pieces in this video. I'm going to use that first one with the Leafy Flourish stencil to make a card. I'm going to use my favorite background to create a background. And then a couple of the other ones I'm going to die cut some sentiments out of. Now, while I was waiting for my glitter neon paste to dry, I thought, wouldn't it be fun to mix some mica powder in with this? Now, originally, my plan was to just smear it on some cardstock, show you the effect, and just leave it at that. But after they had dried, I just thought, why not make them into cards, because they have such a unique property to them. So you can see how adding that mica powder to that paste lightened up the color, but it also pearlized it. So we have some pearlized neon paste here. Now my mica powder, it's called silver, but it's really like a white. It doesn't have a lot of gray silver properties to it. It's more like a white platinum almost. So you can mix whatever type of mica powder you want. I tried to pick something that was as neutral as possible, because if you pick a colored mica powder, the two colors are going to blend. You're going to get a different color out of it. So I wanted, even though I knew the mica powder was going to change the look of my paste a little bit, I didn't want to completely change it into a different color. So for my first background there, I used Summer Sky, Apple, Lemon Peel, Blossom, and Lilac for the Leafy Flourish. For these backgrounds here, I'm just using Summer Sky, Blossom, and Lilac. I didn't want to do too many colors. Really, I was mainly experimenting to see what the final result was going to be. So these tend to be my favorite colors to go to when I'm doing little blends. I just like the blue, purple, and pink. Again, they will work with whatever colors you want, or whatever colors of the paste you want to. Now, I just pulled in my first card, or one of my cards from my first video with this. If you want to see those cards made, I will link that video at the end of this one. So you can see that it does change the colors of the paste, but once it's completely dry, the pearlized look is absolutely beautiful. It gives you a lot more ways to use your paste when you can mix different things in there. And these gel pastes work well because they are translucent, so they're a little bit clear, so you see those things that are mixed in there. If you have an opaque paste, it won't work quite so well because that opaqueness is going to hide it all. So while that's all drying, I am ready to continue with my Leafy Flourish card. Now I did wait completely overnight, let it dry so that I knew it was 100% dry before moving on. When you're working with pastes and gels, especially because this particular one has a matching embossing folder, you want to make sure that it is 100% dry before you run it through that embossing folder. Because if it's only dry on the surface and it's still wet or still not set on the inside, there's a chance you're going to ruin your design by putting it through the pressure of the embossing folder, whereas knowing it's completely dry, you don't have to worry about that. Now I matched up the coordinating die set that comes with this embossing folder, taped it in place, die cut my leaves, and now I'm matching it into the embossing folder and I'm going to emboss all of that beautiful detail. Now another option here would be to just use the stencil set and have that as a card background, but I absolutely love that the coordinating embossing folder has a coordinating die set with it, so I wanted to have that die cut. This way I can take this piece and put it on top of one of my backgrounds. Now again, because the background has those neon colors, I move it on the background so that it's not exactly placed where the colors below the leaves match. That way those leaves stick out a little bit more or pop out a little bit more. But this is a step that you could eliminate if you wanted. You could just have just that stenciled or the stenciled die cut and embossed background and just put it onto white cardstock. Another option would be to put it onto some black or dark gray cardstock to coordinate with that anthracite ink. That would look fantastic as well. Now, because the piece that I did my embossing on was 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, I've now taken one of my backgrounds and I trimmed that down to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. I'm going to glue this stenciled, embossed, and die cut piece onto that trimmed down background, and once it's completely dry, then I will use my shears and I will trim it down. It was much easier to do that than trying to trim this down without having a straight edge to put against the edge of my guillotine trimmer. So this is the best way that I found to do that, to trim that down to make sure that it matches. Another option would have been to trim it down before I did my die cutting and stenciling. However, by doing it this way, I was able to move that leaf piece till I had it on my background exactly how I wanted it to. And you wouldn't necessarily be able to know that or see that before you do the die cutting and put it onto your background. For the mat for this card, I took a piece of hammermill cardstock, trimmed it down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches, and then I'm using that anthracite ink to just do a little bit of ink blending around the outside edge. That way my mat is going to blend perfectly with the anthracite stenciled part of my image here. For my sentiment, I'm using the Very Best Wishes stamp and die set. This is a new one from Lisa Horton Crafts and Spellbinders. So I haven't actually used this one yet. So the first thing I like to do anytime I'm using a clear stamp and it's new is I take a white eraser, I run it on the stamping surface. It removes any possible manufacturing residue and it helps that stamp take the ink a little bit better. Then I use a brush and remove any of those eraser bits, and I'm using my Misty stamping tool in order to stamp that. That way I can stamp it multiple times. So in order to make sure that this stamping coordinates with my stenciling and my mat, I'm using that anthracite ink to do that stamping. It cleans off the stamp really, really easy. I just have a damp microfiber cloth there and it comes right off. That way, when I go to use it again, I know my stamp is clean and I don't have to worry about having any ink residue on there. So this sub-sentiment stamp set has a coordinating stamp or coordinating die to cut them all out at once, which is so handy. I love being able to do a bunch of sentiments at once and cut them all out at the same time. It also has a Wishes die set that actually has 2 mats to it. I'm only going to use one for the cards that I'm creating today, but you could do a double mat behind it if you wanted. And I love the fact that that is an option. I wanted my focus to be on my neon glitter paste and not to take up too much space or cover them too much. So I opted to just use one matte around it or one shadow around it. And I love the fact that there is an option to do either one. So when I go to die cut the upper layer, I'm going to use one of my glitter paste backgrounds. It die cuts beautifully. When I put it onto this cardstock, I did a really thin layer, so there's not a lot of dimension to die cut through. I run it through my die cutting machine, and when I pull that out, I like to kind of hold my cardstock firm in one hand and wiggle it with another one, and it comes right out. I do check the backside to make sure it's die cut all the way through before doing that, because if it's not die cut all the way through, there's no way that that's going to work. But it die cut through that gel paste background beautifully. I didn't have any issues. I'm using some Barely Art glue in a fine line bottle to glue everything together. I use it for most of my cards. I like the fact that you can wiggle things in place, and because I'm using liquid glue, it goes a really long way. A little bit of glue lasts a long time. So with all of that ready to go, I'm ready to trim the excess from my Leafy Flourish off of my background. Easiest way to do it is flip over that piece so you can see the back of it, and you can easily just trim along the edges. Now we're ready to assemble the card. So I have a white card base that I'm using here. You could, if you wanted, use a colored card base, but I didn't want to take any focus away from those gorgeous neons. So by having that white frame there, it ties in with the white shadow that you get when you die cut your leaves, as well as the areas on that background that may not have some paste. So in those corners, there's some areas that don't have paste on it, and it works perfectly with those. Then I'm ready to glue down the wishes die cut, and then I'll glue down the sending part. I like to glue down the main sentiment first and then do the sub sentiment after it, just to make sure that I can tuck it in a little bit. I want to make sure that the focus is on that die cut word, just a personal preference. For my next card, while my first one is drying, I decided to do my die cutting for the next card rather than just sit and wait for my glue to dry and then have to do this anyways. So once again, I'm using that same Best Wishes Very Best Wishes stamp and die set. I'm using the same background that I die cut before to die cut the wishes for this one. And I'm going to, for this one, use some black cardstock for my mat instead of using Hammermill cardstock inked with that anthracite. Now, for my focal point for this card, I'm using the Layered Wildflowers die set. This is another new one. It is in the same collection with Spellbinders as this Very Best Wishes stamp and die set. And because of all the beautiful colors on the glitter neon gel paste background, I didn't want to cover that up with more color. I didn't want those colors competing with each other. So I just die cut my florals in black. You could use silhouette dies for this as well. That would work beautifully as well. I like the fact that these are layered wildflowers, so they do have different layers to them. When you're looking at the actual card, you can see those layers and you can see that dimension. When you see the piece on screen or in a picture, you're not really going to see that as much, but because these are different layers on here, it just adds a little bit of extra texture. We already have some texture on that background because of that glitter, but I just love the look of these layered pieces all done in black. It's just a little bit different than just having a plain silhouette that's completely flat and doesn't have that extra detail to it. So for my mat for this card, I trimmed that down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. My colorful background here, I'm going to trim that down to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. Now, if you had your gel paste all the way to the edges, you could make this a little bit bigger. I made my pieces or my center pieces a little bit smaller simply because the gel wasn't going all the way to the corners or all the way to the edges. I didn't mind a little bit of white space in some of the corners, but I wanted to have not too much area that didn't have that gel on it. So with all of those pieces ready to go, I'm ready to start assembling my card. So the first thing I put down is that black mat. Then I'm putting my glitter gel background. You do need to use your fingers to kind of flatten it out because that gel paste reacts with the cardstock. It kind of curves it a little bit. So I got so into that second card there, I forgot that I hadn't actually showed you that first one. So that was completely finished. I absolutely love those gorgeous neon leaves, just such a different look to them. And the video doesn't capture the shimmer to them. You don't really see it in the video, but in real life, it's got some really beautiful shimmer. The glitter that I used was microfine glitter, so it's really, really fine glitter, but you could mix it with different types of glitter if you wanted. If you wanted something a little bit more chunky, a little bit more obvious, that would work as well. I would just suggest using a neutral color. Same reason as that pearl, you don't want it to change the color. Even like a silver probably would work because you'd still see that silver, but it wouldn't compete with those neons. So it's a fun way to just change up and get some more use and different ideas for those neon gel pastes. So here is the second card, a very, very simple card. But again, I didn't want to compete with that background because that background was so cool. Here are my pearlized neons completely dried. And again, originally when I did this, I was only going to do a sample so that you could see it. But once it was dry, I just really liked the final look of it and thought this just needs to be turned into a card. I wanted to see it finished, and I wanted to see it finished compared to the glitter background. So this card here is going to be very, very similar to my last card, very similar in design. I'm going to use a black silhouette of a flower from that same layered wildflowers die set. I'm using a different one. The first one I used, I think it's more kind of like a poppy or maybe a cosmos. I don't know the exact name of the flower. This one is a little bit more like a bachelor's button, so it has some kind of spiky detail to it. Once I have my background and my matte die cut, and I did my die cutting of my flowers and of the Wishes shadow off screen, I'm going to die cut the top layer of that Wishes word. Once again, I'm using one of my pearlized backgrounds here. By having backgrounds that have different colors mixed in, you can die cut in between a couple different colors. It just gives it a little bit of a more unique look. If you wanted it to just be a solid color, you could also do that, but I always like the different looks, the ones that you don't necessarily get from just regular cardstock. So with that die cut, I can put that onto my shadow, and then I can set that aside to dry and just assemble the rest of my flower and the rest of my card. So once again, I'm using that Barely Art glue in the fine line bottle, and you can see that I use it for the large pieces to glue the bases of my cards together, and I also use it for those tiny die cuts. It comes in so handy. When I die cut or when I glue layers together, I have a large acrylic block that I regularly will put on those pieces just to keep everything nice and flat, make sure everything has some good contact, frees up my hands to work on other things as well. So I don't have to sit there holding something down while it dries. The bonus to that as well is if I want to figure out my placement for things, I can do that right on top of that acrylic block. I can see exactly how it's going to look on the background and know whether the design that I have in my head is going to work, whether I'm going to like that or whether I need to change or alter it in a little way. So once my flower head is completely glued together, I can start assembling my card. I don't glue the flower head onto my stem or do my leaves. I want to make sure to be able to place those when they are on the background of the card. I think that works a little bit better. I can customize it and pick and choose exactly what's going to work for the card that I'm creating. Now for this card, as well as my last one, I did a single flower, mainly because I didn't want to cover up too much of the background. If you wanted to have more flowers, you could easily have a few of them here and line them up. But again, I wanted to have the majority of that background visible. Once my floral is down, I'm ready to put the wishes down, and then I can glue down that sub-sentiment. And just like the last one, I do tuck it in behind that wishes die cut. I want to have that wishes be the focal point and my sub-sentiment be that sub-sentiment. So here is that card there, and you can see very similar design, but we get a completely different look. That pearlized background, you can see that it's a little bit shimmery. The glitter one, again, the glitter doesn't really show up as well on the video, but in person, it's got some gorgeous shimmer to it. So the last thing I wanted to do was take out this alphabet soup embossing folder. I'm going to take one of those pearlized backgrounds and I'm just going to use it in my embossing folder. I'm going to ink that embossing folder with some black StazOn ink to get that in the recessed areas of this pearl background. Another option would be to just emboss this and then use a StazOn pad to just rub over the surface very lightly. You get an opposite look as to what the finished result of this is. For this, I'm doing the background in black. If you just rub the pad on top of it, then your letters are actually going to be black. So I'm doing just a very, very simple card here. This technique will work with any embossing folder. And again, depending on the embossing folder that you choose, you're going to get a little bit different look. Now, by doing this with black StazOn, I know that it's going to dry really, really quickly, and it's going to dry on top of that glossy gel paste. Dye-based inks, even those matte blending inks, are not going to dry on that gel paste, and it would be lifted up regularly when you touch it with your fingers. So you want to make sure to have a permanent ink, and I chose StazOn because it dries super, super quick. However, you do need to use a special cleaner to clean it off. So I like to use some Ultra Clean, and then I clean it off with my microfiber cloth. Ultra Clean does leave an oily residue. So once that was cleaned off with my microfiber cloth, I did go bring it under a tap full of water or warm water and use some dish soap to kind of rub in there or massage in there with my fingers just to make sure to get any of that oily residue out, so that I know that next time I'm going to use that embossing folder, it's totally clean. For this particular card, I just used a black mat or black cardstock for matte. I trimmed that to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. My embossed piece here is trimmed to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. So my mats for all 4 of my cards are exactly the same. Now I am going to use one of the sub-sentiments from that Very Best Wishes stamp and die set. It's not necessarily the perfect one for an alphabet background. Spellbinders had their monthly clubs this month, which is May 2025. Has a lot of school themed things, and their Better Press of the month has a sentiment that says you complete my alphabet or something, and then there's another sentiment that says something about A to Z. I think that would be the perfect sentiment with this particular card, but I didn't really want to bring in more things. So this, I just wanted to see that pearlized gel paste background with that blackout technique, and I really love the final look of it, and I think it will work well for lots of different things. Then we have that third card there with that pearlized background and just the black silhouette of the flower. And I really love how the pearlized part really shows off well on that background. Then we have my favorite background, that glitter background. And again, the glitter this video does not do that glitter justice. It's absolutely beautiful. And I love just the combination of those different colors on that background. So when you have paste and gel paste, make sure to use the excess on some just scrap cardstock. You come up with the most cool things. And then the card that inspired it all, the Neon Leafy Flourish stenciled, embossed, and die cut card. I absolutely love the final result of that one. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed my experimenting with those neon gel paste. I absolutely loved the final result and hope it inspires you to get creative with your gel paste. Have a fantastic day.